Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you here today with an article from The Federalist dated November 8th. It says if Palestinians wanted peace and prosperity, they'd already have it. And I saw that and I was like, yep, that's true, but let's talk about it. So that's a disquieting picture, and this is what they teach kids that are very, very young. So that's fun. And subheadline says they chose violence over and over again. That is correct. Sorry, I suddenly got like the burps. But we'll try to get through this without any mouth flatulence coming through. It says in 2005, Palestinian Arabs were given autonomy over the Gaza Strip for the first time in their history. To make it happen, the Israeli government forcibly removed thousands of Israelis from the area. Without military protection, Jews would be murdered by Palestinians who prefer their land Juden free, which is, as you probably can imagine, that means free of Jews. So as Jews were being evicted from their homes, some began to dismantle the farms and hothouses they'd built, reluctant to hand over years of hard work. In the name of peace, however, American Jewish donors purchased the 3,000 remaining greenhouses that stood over 1,000 acres for $14 million and gave it to the Palestinian Authority gratis. It says a large portion of the donations were earmarked for special equipment like computerized irrigation systems and other modern farming systems for Palestinians. And I'm guessing we're about to get into is that, oh no, they didn't use the money for anything like that. As soon as the Jews were gone, mobs of Palestinians showed up and broke windows, stole irrigation hoses, water pumps, and everything else they could to get their hands on, destroying everything they could as police stood by and watched. This happened before Hamas came to power, before any blockades. By 2007, the unity government between the PLO and Hamas had fallen apart after the latter won a landslide election in 2006 and began defenestrating its political opponents. So they were throwing people out of windows, huh? So there's been a war. It was a warning. It says there's not been a real election in the West Bank since. And it's a good thing because Islamists would surely grab power there as they had in Gaza. Joe Biden likes to say that Hamas doesn't speak for Palestinians, but the ugly truth is that Hamas is a far better ambassador of the Palestinian people than the moderate Fatah party, and moderate is in scare quotes because they're really not, which we prop up with billions of dollars. Yes, because I love when our tax money, my tax money, your tax money, goes to terrorists and terrorist groups or terrorists or people that have sympathy with terrorism and that want to see us all dead. I have a problem with that. So, article continues, says, I thought about all this when reading Senator Rand Paul's hopelessly naive piece in The Federalist today. Paul contends that peace between Israel and Arabs is contingent on promised prosperity for Palestinians, and you can read that piece here. It is linked in the description below in this article. And I didn't read Rand Paul's thing or his article, but we'll just keep going. Because he mentions the word prosperity 8 times. In fact, contending that non Hamas Palestinians must hear a message of hope of what could come if they renounced violence. The Libertarian senator then unsheathes this Pollyannish suggestion. Quote, instead of dropping leaflets to 1 million Palestinians to flee or be bombed, perhaps we might consider leaflets announcing the prosperity and benefits if they chose a government, or if they choose a government that recognizes Israel and renounces violence. End quote. As Palestinians have been hearing this message nonstop since 1948, if not since the 1920s. Many of the Arabs who immigrated to British Palestine from Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere were lured by the promise of the prosperity that was being created by Jewish newcomers. Once there, fueled by the propaganda and lies of their leaders, they created an intractable situation. Before there were any open air prisons or occupied territories, there was terrorism and massacres of Jews. Yes, and that's something that a lot of the people who are out there marching today and saying the things that they're saying don't seem to understand is that Jews were being massacred there well before 1948. I mean, for decades. So just keep that in mind. And still, when offered a state in 1948 with the promise of self determination and prosperity, they rejected it and tried to annihilate the region's Jews. Yes, they did. It says Paul's belief that Palestinians are itching for prosperity is reminiscent of the neocons' belief that the Islamic world was longing for Western style democracy. No doubt, many innocent civilians are interested in peace and safety, but for most, the frame of thinking about the world and the logic employed to make sense of it are on a different wavelength. If they weren't, Palestinians would have built a prosperous nation a long time ago. They had every chance to do it. So, Palestinian statehood was on the table after the 1967 and 73 wars, and in the early 1990s and the early 2000s, and a bunch of times in between. So, yeah, and as far as I know, they were offered statehood 6 times and they've turned it down every single time. So, I mean, it's essentially like Israel's extending them an olive branch that they're slapping away, and then people are like, "Well, how come they don't have their own state?" It's like, well, they've tried many times. It was offered in exchange for the recognition of Israel and the renouncement of violence. Just as it didn't happen then, it can't happen now. No Palestinian leader can agree to a deal on statehood because they would surely be deposed and murdered. That's correct, and that's why you will see none of them saying that is the Palestinian self destructive embrace of the right to return, an idea tied to the historical myth of Nakba, or Nakba means catastrophe. And that was when Israel became a state in 1948. That's what they call it, is the Nakba, and that's when the Arabs started leaving, I believe. And or Islamist fundamentalism makes peace virtually impossible. Yes, I wouldn't even put the word virtually there. I would just say it makes peace impossible. It says, but what stopped the Arabs of Gaza or the West Bank from achieving prosperity? There are hundreds of stateless minorities in the world. Very few turn to violence. Many thrive. The Jews and Arabs lived in similarly desolate places before the partition, but in the decades since, Israel's GDP per capita has risen to be on par with South Korea, Spain, and France. Jordan is on par with El Salvador and Namibia. Egypt is on par with Mongolia and Gabon. Is that also the fault of the Zionists? And I'm sure the people out there marching today are going to say it is, even though it's totally not. Indeed, like any free nation, Israel makes mistakes, but the idea that it stands in the way of the Palestinian success due to bigotry or colonialist intentions or a racial grudge is a paranoid conspiracy spread by Middle East leaders and Western intellectuals. They would like nothing more than a peaceful neighbor. Every Israeli restriction on Gazans has been implemented as a reaction to violence by Gazans. When you send Gaza concrete, they don't build skyscrapers, they build tunnels and military bases under hospitals. They tear down streetlight poles and dig up water pipes to make casements for rockets, tens of thousands of them. When you allow shipments of necessities, they smuggle in explosives and weapons from Iran. So this is why I'm against sending them money because they're every single time you have the Democrats that are like, oh no, we're sending this to them to use for like nice things. They're like, no, we're actually going to use it to kill people. And Democrats are like, no, we're pretty sure they're just going to use it for nice things. Like they're telling you what they're going to do with it. And they're like, no, we're still going to send them money, you morons. Because Gazans are unwilling to build the basic infrastructure necessary for themselves despite receiving hundreds of millions in aid. Israel can only cut power off in Gaza because Israeli power companies provide that electricity often for free. The same goes for clean water. Gaza water comes through pipelines from Israeli desalination plants. The notion that Israel is engaged in genocide, as you can see, is preposterous in every conceivable way. That is correct. And I've said on many other videos, if there's anybody that's saying Israel's engaged in a genocide, that is someone whose opinion you can absolutely just throw in the trash that they don't know what the hell they're even talking about. Says perhaps the only way to implement hope and prosperity for the Palestinians is to tighten the occupation of Gaza and create basic civic institutions to make it possible. If, as many Democrats claim, Hamas is not the true agent of the Palestinian people, then Israel would be liberating them from a violent cult. But of course, this would be met with condemnation from the world, not to mention it would mean Israel putting its own citizens' lives in danger. Israel is asked to create an independent state for people who are incapable of living in peace with Jews or anyone else. A Gazan nation would be a place where Iran sends deadlier missiles and, one day, nuclear weapons. At this point, acquiescing to any independent Palestinian state would be suicide for the Jewish state. That is 100% correct. Says no responsible nation would do it, and a leaflet isn't going to change anything. Yeah, I mean, these folks, all they want is just the destruction of Israel and Jews. I'm going to leave this image here because it's kind of powerful. Um, it's just that's what they want. They don't care. If we're dropping leaflets, they're going to look at it and just they're going to call it propaganda and go back to doing what they're doing. They've been indoctrinated so heavily that they can't see the other side at all. They're incapable of it. And as long as we keep giving them money, this is going to keep happening. So, yep, that's kind of really what I had to say about that. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.